so excited. We are so excited to be here. And we'll do some introductions, but this is the event, Getting into Your Dream MBA Program. We're excited to share some nuggets of wisdom with each of you today. So here's a quick agenda. We're going to do some introductions. I am a coach on Leland, and then we have our co-founder and community manager from Leland here. And then we have 4 coach panelists today. So we will do some introductions, and then we'll do an overview of MBA programs, dive into the deferred MBA program, since those are a little bit less known. And then we'll also dive into some MBA application process and tips. We'll do some Q&A at the end. Just a note on that, if you do have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll try to incorporate them in the discussion. In the case that we don't get to one of your questions, feel free to save it for the Q&A session and you can ask that to one of the panelists. And then we'll conclude with a final word and a thank you. So let's dive into introductions. I'll go first. So I'm Andrew. I'm an MBA coach at Leland. I graduated from BYU, studied information systems, and I applied through the deferred MBA process, was fortunate enough to get accepted to Sloan and Kellogg. And I accepted at Kellogg and looking forward to matriculating in the next 1 to 4 years. And I currently work in tech and I'm a deferred coach on Leland. So I'll pass it over to you, Cam, to do an intro. And then after that, over to you, Erica.
Andrew, thanks, and thanks everyone for being here. My name's Cam, co-founder here at Leland. I was a Stanford undergrad as well as MBA at the GSB. Excited to have everyone here. So happy to be man in the chat for you all. So drop those questions in, anything that comes up, and I'll be able to answer. But welcome and thanks for being here. Erica, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica. I'm the customer experience and community manager at Leland. I graduated from BYU undergrad in 2017. There I studied finance and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And now we'll go to our panelists. We have an awesome panel today with a lot of, or with great backgrounds and a lot of awesome coaching expertise and experience. And so we'll just present ourselves in the sequence shown on the screen. So I'll kick it over to you, Amy, for a quick intro, and then Laura, Brennan, and Jade to follow.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy, and I am a former Wharton staff member. I worked at Wharton for 12 years, supporting the admissions team, conducting interviews, sitting in on admissions committee, reading applications. Also worked on the program management side, closely with students once they had matriculated into the process and into the program. And then since leaving Wharton, I've been focused on admissions consulting. So happy to see you guys here and looking forward to a great panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Nelson. I am a Ross graduate from the MBA program. When I was in the program, I was on the admissions committee my second year. So I read applications and conducted interviews in that time frame. I've been an admissions consultant for over 10 years. So I've seen a lot come my way from all types of backgrounds. I work with traditional candidates in addition to those with kind of less traditional career paths, as I had one myself.
Hi, everyone. Great to be there with you. My name is Brennan Fader. I'm the 2021 National Collegian of the Year on the Board of Directors and a deferred admit to the GSB. So super excited to be here and answer any of your questions. And then outside of all the fun worlds of my corporate job, I get to also coach on Leland. So great to be here with you. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jay. I was a recent applicant in this most recent cycle and was accepted to both MIT and Chicago and ended up accepting at MIT. Currently a math teacher in Dallas, and also really excited to help out and answer questions as I can. Multiple people here helped me with my application, so super excited to pay it forward.
Awesome. Thank you, coaches, for the backgrounds. We're now going to kick it over to Erica to give us a little bit of an overview of who Leland is and what Leland does.
All right, awesome. It's a pleasure to be able to present this slide and talk about Leland, which I'm very passionate about. Leland, we provide the content and community and coaching to help people get into their dream schools. So with content, we have a full content library of all different articles and materials to help at every step of the application process. In addition, our community, which we just launched a few weeks back, is a really exciting private Slack community where we have elite applicants, coaches, admins, all working together and chatting in order to help and support the future applicants trying to get into business school, as well as, talking about different elements of the application process. So it's been really exciting to see how people are interacting and getting their questions answered, as well as paying it forward to people who are currently applying and have done so in the past. And then finally, as you see here, we have 4 of our rockstar world-class coaches presenting today, and we have about 60 coaches live on the platform, ranging from recent admits all the way to professional career admissions coaches. So it's really exciting to for people who are joining Leland to be able to find a coach that meets their budget, their background, and their goals.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. So now we'd love to get to know you. We would love to know, where are you dialing in from? If you're a graduate, where do you work? Or if you're still in school, where are you studying? And then what's your dream MBA school or dream MBA program? Would love to see some of those answers come through the chat. Would love to learn a little bit more about you, and also a quick plug, just so that we can see you guys and interact face to face. Would love for you guys to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable doing so.
Well, as folks are typing, I can tell you that I know at least 3 of these individuals live in Missouri. And then I'm unsure on others, but hopefully if folks have ability to type in, I know a couple of you are just audio only, so you might not have the ability if you're traveling right now.
Yeah, no worries if you're not able to. We would just love to get to know you in the case that you're able to send through the chat. But thanks for the color, Shanda. We can just keep moving through this. So we're going to dive into just a quick overview of the different types of MBA programs and the different deadlines. So Laura, I'll send it over to you to share that with us, just a little bit of an overview as well as a walkthrough through these timelines.
Sure. So there's lots of different types of MBA programs, and kind of depending on your goals and how your career takes shape, you may elect into or pursue an MBA program rather at different stages. Of course, many of you may be interested in the Deferred program, and we'll get into the details of that today. But there are also other options like the traditional full-time MBA, executive MBA for more seasoned professionals, part-time MBA where people work concurrently. So here's a snapshot of what the program deadlines look like at this stage. As you see, many of these programs offer different stages where you can apply for the various programs. And, I'll note, of course, round 1 has passed. So, we're really looking at rounds 2 and 3. If you are preparing applications for round 2, as just an example, I hope that you've gotten started, because those come up in a quick couple of months. You have a little more time if you're in a deferred program. And, it's a great time to be collecting information here and, talking with people, on this panel and of course in the Leland community.
Awesome. And we'll give you a little bit of a rough timeline on how you should think about approaching your applications at a later time. Thanks, Laura.
Mhm.
And now just to double click, because we're aware that many of you are current students and would likely be looking to apply to the deferred MBA programs. And so we'd love to just do a little bit of a double click to teach you a little bit more about these deferred programs so that you're aware and know how to approach the applications when they come about. So I'll kick it over to you, Brennan, to walk us through what deferred MBA programs are.
Awesome. And thanks for those folks placing their answers in the chat. That's super helpful. And hopefully we can kind of guide some of the unknowns and help you make some decisions on where you want to apply, which is exciting. So what are deferred MBA programs and how do they differ from the traditional path? So this is really the only opportunity for you to apply as an undergrad into an MBA program. So you have the opportunity to apply in your final year of study. So for most cases, that's your final year of undergrad, unless you go directly from an undergrad program into another master's program. You're also able at most schools to apply in your final year of study if you go from your undergrad to your master's directly without any break in between. Once you get accepted, you can defer your enrollment for 2 to 5 years, depending on the school. Some allow up to 5, some allow up to 4. While you enter the workforce, and there's an expectation of full-time work experience, but that can also be entrepreneurial and a variety of different involvements. You actually don't have to commit typically to the school of what you're going to be doing during those years. You just have to have some constructive experience in your deferral period. Then as far as application deadlines, they're a little bit later than the traditional MBA in most cases. So they're offered in typically late April. Some are offered a secondary option to apply in June, but the majority of them are going to be the late spring. So that way you can apply, you'll do interviews the following month or so, and then get your decisions within a couple months of that. The actual application itself is pretty identical to the traditional application process in that you have typically your personal statements, resumes, interview, and cover letter and letters of recommendation as well. So it is pretty typical in terms of the typical flow of structure of a regular MBA application process. And then you're also integrated into the MBA cohort at large. So your actual MBA experience itself will also be the same. It really, the purpose why a lot of schools are creating this and more schools are continuing to add it year over year is it allows schools to lock in high potential candidates early on before they start looking for MBAs down the road. So a couple of schools started doing it a few years ago, the rest of them caught on, and it seems to be more and more popular every year. So it's a really awesome opportunity to apply early without the risk of if you don't get admitted, you'll be able to apply a few years down the road through a regular decision path as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Brennan, for the comprehensive overview on deferred MBA programs. And Jay's going to walk us through what schools offer deferred MBA programs. So I'll kick it over to you, Jay.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, absolutely. Like Cameron said in the chat, happy to talk about accounting, the few and the proud. Not an easy major to get through. I think in terms of thinking about deferred programs, it's going to go into a little bit of history for the deferred MBA. The first program to actually start one was Harvard back in 2010, I believe, with the 2+2 program. And after that, Stanford and Yale started their programs in regards to, like Brennan was talking about, locking in high potential candidates at an earlier age. But by 2019 and 2020, almost a lot of other schools within the top 10 or so started their own deferred MBA programs, with almost all of them in that range having a deferred program by this point. So in terms of schools that offer them, the ones that most applicants apply to or most aware of are Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and then Kellogg, Columbia, MIT, and Chicago Booth, which make up a term in the community called the M7. Outside of that, schools such as Berkeley, University of Virginia, and Yale also offer programs. The one thing I'll note is that Yale has a unique program where instead of deferring for a few years and then working, you actually attend after undergrad, spend a year on campus, then a year working, and then a year back on campus after your work experience. So in terms of school that offered them, the deferred MBA program has become incredibly popular over the last few years. It's something that I think a lot more college students are aware of in recent years, and something that's becoming more of a viable and well-worn path than it was before.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. So now we'll talk about why you should apply to deferred MBA programs. And this is something that I'm very passionate about because I had some self-doubt about applying to some top MBA programs as a final year, in my final year of my undergrad. And so to kick things off, first, it's a no risk shot at applying. So in the case that you do not get admitted to the school, you will not be penalized if you apply down the road. It's actually encouraged for you to apply again if you were not admitted through the deferred process. So 2 shots on goal is better than 1. It also provides you flexibility in career options. So if you go to a big company and you want to go try like entrepreneurship or try something else ahead of going to get your MBA program, you have that flexibility and can make that jump. And in the case that that startup or that career pivot or whatever doesn't work out, you have a fallback plan to go to business school and can reevaluate and figure out where you want to go from there. It's also an early career boost. So the moment you get admitted to a school through the deferred program, you instantly have access to the current students at the school as well as alumni as part of your network, and you can pull the strings or leverage that connection that you have with them to get connected and to network. Fewer of your peers are doing it. This may be the first time you've heard about it. I didn't hear about it until a couple of months prior to actually applying, and so that's a plus. And you're only competing against other final year students. You're not competing against people with many years of industry experience. So that's something good. And then you burn different social capital, meaning for each application, you have to submit 2 letters of recommendation. And so you'll be asking different recommenders at that time than you would be if you're applying down the road. And then also, in the case that you don't get admitted, you master the application process. You know what it takes to put together an MBA application. You can reevaluate and figure out what you did right, what you did wrong, and you can amend or make those weaknesses become strengths if you apply later on. And then there's a lower cost to apply from a fee standpoint. So a lot of reasons to apply, and what I can say just to finalize this point is, if you are serious about getting an MBA and you're a current student, you should for sure apply through the deferred MBA process. So now we're going to dive into the meatier portion of this event, which is talking about the MBA application process and the tips. So we're going to hand it over to Amy to walk us through the different parts of the MBA application.
Thanks, Andrew. So what you're looking at right here is a really great list of basically all the really important pieces to keep in mind as you start to think about how you're going to tackle your application. I definitely recommend looking to do your standardized test first. Schools these days will take the GMAT or the GRE. And I suggest doing that first because if you can devote, time to studying alone before you need to actually dive into your applications, that is really ideal so that you can give the test the attention that it needs. Hopefully, once you take your test, you have an outstanding score, and then the next step would be to start thinking about application strategy. And that really becomes the narrative that's going to drive your application. So that's going to be the point where you want to identify the overarching themes that are going to be the differentiators that you're going to highlight throughout all the pieces of your application. And then once you have that strategy in place, you'll apply it to what I like to call the big bucket items. And those are the actual pieces of your application that will be submitted to the schools. And those are, your letters of recommendation, your resume, your essays, and fingers crossed, the interview. Letters of recommendation, different strategies depending on what kind of applicant you are, whether you're deferred or traditional. You want to think about asking, people who, well, what you want to prioritize is people who've worked really closely with you and people who will be able to speak directly to what it's like to work with you. I know we're going to get to more details on that later. So in addition to letters of recommendation, there's also your resume. Again, different strategies for an MBA application resume versus a job resume. So some tips we'll cover also in a few minutes on that front as well. And then also you'll see listed on here awards and honors and extracurriculars, and those definitely come into play within your resume as well as on the application itself, on the data form that you'll fill out for these schools. And those are pieces you for sure want to highlight and use in terms of your differentiating themes within your application strategy. The essays are really, the meatiest part of all of this. And that's where you really get an opportunity to express who you are. And, you'll definitely want to try to reveal pieces of your personality while you're writing your essays, in addition to answering the direct questions that these schools are asking. And then down the line comes the interview, and that's the time you'll really get to talk. You'll get to talk one-on-one with a representative from the school, and all of this comes together in a nice little package. And that's a summary of the application process.
Cool. Thanks, Amy. So as you can see, there's a lot of different parts of the application, so something to be aware of. And then if you're going to be applying to multiple schools, you can times all of that by however many schools you're applying to. So it's a lot of work and something to be mindful of as you go into the process. So knowing the different aspects of the application and what goes into it, what part of the application seems to be the most daunting to you? For those of you that are able, would you be willing to share in the chat? Brennan, the GMAT, that the standardized exam was also quite daunting to me as well. Cool. And we'll just let answers trickle in there, and we'll just take note as we see them come through. So I'll give you a quick brief application timeline and how you should think about things. You can treat this as a suggestion. Not everyone takes the same amount of time, and some people take more and others take less, but we recommend starting your application process at least 6 months in advance, and that's where you'll start studying for and taking the GMAT or GRE. Between the 6 to 3 months range is where you would start finding a coach, like an MBA admissions coach, to help you through the process, start selecting your schools, develop your application strategy, contact your recommenders, and start having conversations with them. And also starting to brainstorm and draft your essays. And then 1 month left is where you would really hammer home your resume and filling out the rest of your application and doing those last minute checks. Once you submit your application, not everyone gets interviewed. If you do get an interview, it's a good sign that the school is interested in your candidacy. So you can factor in interview prep after you submit your applications. Cool. So we're going to get into the meatier part of the application. We're going to talk about the MBA resume, letters of recommendations, and essays, because these are often seen as the most challenging and the most time-consuming parts or aspects of the application. So we'll start with the MBA resume. So this document is essentially the backbone of your application. This sets and lays the foundations of the application, and also allows you to highlight your professionalism and your communication skills. It also sets you up for successful interviews. And so one thing that I'll call out, and then what we're going to get some tips and advice from our panelists, is a common mistake that people do is they submit their normal like recruiting for jobs resume, which is full of jargon and like industry specific knowledge. And also jobs are looking for different things in candidates versus like MBA programs and the admissions committees are looking for different things in their applicants. And so do not submit your recruiting resume. You should for sure come up with and draft an MBA resume. And so we're going to actually talk to our panelists to provide you some of their best tips and advice. And so maybe we do it in this order. We'll go Amy and Laura, and maybe you can share some like tips and advice or best practices for how you would approach like the traditional EMBA or part-time resume. And then following Amy and Laura, we'll hand it over to you, Jane Brennan. And if you'd be willing to share your best tips or pieces of advice for crafting a deferred MBA resume. So I'll hand it over to you, Amy. And then once you're done, you can kick it to Laura and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I think the number one thing to keep in mind in terms of the difference between a typical job application resume and an MBA application resume is that for a job application, you're trying to show sort of the broad spectrum of responsibilities. But for an MBA application resume, you're really trying to show accomplishments and impact. And one of the best tools for showing impact is using quantifiable results. So that's, I use that term all the time when I'm working on resumes. Any opportunity you have to actually measure the impact that you've had is a really reliable way to, get your point across to admissions committees. And so that's a trick that I definitely would recommend to everybody here.
Yeah, that's great advice, Amy. And a lot of the resumes that I get from clients that I'm working with kind of start in this responsibilities format, and we walk through the process of translating each of their roles into more high impact descriptions. So you just want to make sure that you're relaying that through the MBA resume. I coach people through the ACR format, action, context, and results. And to Amy's point, wherever you can show metrics is great. I wouldn't discount other opportunities where you've had the chance to mentor people like formally or informally and take on special initiatives as well. I think those are important to demonstrate like all of the, extra initiative you may be taking on too.
Cool. Thank you, Amy and Laura. And then we'll pass it over to you, Jay. Maybe you can share your best tips or pieces of advice from the deferred lens.
Sure, absolutely. I completely agree in terms of highlighting impact. On an early draft of my resume, the biggest piece of feedback I got was I can show that I can do certain skills or techniques, like I knew how to code or I knew how to use Excel, but that was not nearly as important or necessary as showing what I did with those skills. So I think reframing how you think about your resume from can you do the job to what do you actually do in your roles? Like, do you create new initiatives? Do you help make a team more efficient? Do you maybe help solve a big problem? And be able to convey that with metrics is really important. I think my other piece of advice is I think both a balance between like realistic and I guess don't be afraid to like show what you did and be proud of it as well. The resume isn't really a place to, I think, you undermine yourself, but at the same time, these admissions committees will read a lot of resumes and will get a realistic also sense of what's possible or what you did. So I think maintain a balance between the two. The last part is I put an interest line at the bottom of my resume. I think it's like really nice just because it allows you to be a person rather than a list of accomplishments as well. And both of my interviews, I talked about my interests for at least a period of the interview. I think it made me both more relaxed and able to connect with my interviewer. So I'd say if you can come up with a list of interests you feel good about, you are excited about and ready to talk about, I think that it's just a nice touch to have.
Cool. And then Brennan, bring us home.
Yeah, I think everyone covered it really well. I think the biggest difference between the deferred MBA resume is that you don't have the full-time experience to be able to highlight. So I think it's a great opportunity to highlight your extracurricular leadership. Pretty much all the schools have slightly different characteristics that they say they look for, but leadership is the underlying theme and leadership potential among all of the MBA programs. So the more that you can show demonstrated leadership abilities, ability to motivate, influence, change, people and organizations for the better. And again, those are through quantifying your results and the actions that you took to get there. I think that really helps highlight the resume. And I love Jay's point on the interest line. I am a big advocate for filling up the interest line, and make sure you use the entire thing, because the more interest that you list, the higher likelihood that you may connect with someone who's going to read your resume. So I see a lot of candidates have 2 or 3 interests that take up a third of the line. I'm sure you have more interest than that. Don't list everything in the kitchen sink just for the sake of doing it. But if you have more things that you're passionate about and can talk about in an interview setting, or just someone you'd like to talk to, and that they may find interesting in some of the work you do outside of your resume, that may be a great place to put it.
Awesome. Thank you all, panelists. Those were all awesome tips and advice for the MBA resume. Erica is going to drop in the chat. Leland has an amazing MBA resume guide, and it also includes a template. So that's something that you'll want to consider using and checking out while you're developing your own. So now we're going to go into letters of recommendation and why they're important. So letters of recommendation are a third-party assessment. So that's where you're going to go out, and for each school, you're going to get two individuals that are third parties to write about your leadership qualities, your other skills, emotional intelligence, your future potential, etc. So it's really important to select people that you trust, that know you well, but have also seen you do projects or work that has made an impact, whether that's at an organization or in school, whatever it is. It's really, and also the other thing I've noted too is this is where applicants really set themselves apart. You can tell a good letter of recommendation apart from a bad one because of the work that the applicant actually did in taking the time to think about the different recommenders that they were going to select, as well as preparing and guiding the recommenders through the process. So those are two really important aspects of the letter of recommendation. And there's a ton that you can do despite this being out of your control to help your recommenders write powerful letters of recommendation. And so we're going to send it over to our panelists to provide us some of their nuggets of gold on how to approach this process. So we're going to start with Jay and then Laura. For the two of you, since you both went through the MBA application process, who were your recommenders? How did you go about selecting them? And what advice do you have for selecting your recommenders? And then from there, Amy and Brennan will pull you in on how you went about preparing your recommenders, or how you would advise the audience on preparing and guiding the recommenders through the process. So we'll kick it over to you, Jay.
That's great. I think for deferred MBA programs, it is different than a normal MBA process just because you don't have work experience yet. So I think schools also recognize that you may not have at least 2 people who can speak to your work experience. So they'll usually try to accommodate and allow for a professor or maybe a manager of your campus organization or another supervisor in another context to be one of them. But usually they would like professional experience as well. Somebody maybe like your most recent direct supervisor or somebody who can speak towards your professional experience. For me, I chose my, at the time, direct supervisor. I was working part-time during my last year of school at a nonprofit and had a manager who was just extraordinary and very supportive of my journey. And he was one of my recommenders. My other was a professor of mine who I'd known for 2 years and had taken a couple classes with, who was also super supportive. And in terms of choosing them, I took a lot of people's advice and thought about people who would, one, not only like check the boxes for me, but be advocates for me and go maybe above and beyond and try and advocate for my place, because I think that's a bit harder to find rather than a recommender who likes you, but maybe doesn't have the time or the inclination to go above and beyond for you. I also wanted people who could maybe speak to different strengths of mine or me in different contexts, and having a professor who saw me as a student, as part of a community, they could speak to maybe my leadership in that community, my like how I interact with those students, and then having a direct manager who had seen me take feedback and respond to it and maybe try to go above and beyond could both complement each other well. So for me, it was just thinking about who could both go above and beyond for me and also speak to different parts that I wanted to convey.
Awesome. Over to you, Laura.
Yeah, just as a reminder for everyone, I applied to a full-time MBA program. So I had about 4 years of work experience going into that program. So my selection process was a little different. The instructions for many applications in this scenario really want people to get a recommendation from their current supervisor. So that was one of my selections for my process. And, we worked, of course, very closely together, and he knew me very well. And my other recommender was the supervisor I had prior to that. The advice I have for people selecting their recommenders, obviously, is to, assess the relationship that you have. And along the lines of what Jay said, ensure that they have a close understanding of, what your strengths are, where you've demonstrated leadership, what your potential is in your future career, and definitely, set them up for success too. Give them enough time and information where they can write you a really great reference, because this is a big ask for some of them, and the easier that you make it for them, the better off you'll be.
Awesome. Those are great pieces of advice on the selection process. Amy and Brennan, we'll go in that order. We'll kick it over to you. What are your best tips or pieces of advice on how to go about preparing your recommenders and guiding them through the process?
So I work with the applicants that I'm working with. We put together what we call a recommender package. And basically, it's a way for applicants to put on paper sort of some suggestions for what they might want their recommenders to potentially touch on. The schools do publish what they're going to ask the recommenders, what the prompts are. So by putting down on paper, some ideas for your recommender, you're providing them with some content, you're making some suggestions, you're, hoping to have some influence. At the same time, you are not writing their responses for them, but you are, you're giving them some material to work with, which I think is helpful in two different ways. One is to hopefully have some influence, and two also is just to not, set your recommenders free into the abyss and, on their own. And so this way you're really helping them by saying, here's some ideas. And it's, it's general information on there, what you think some of your strengths are, which can usually be directly applied to the prompts that these schools put out there, as well as identifying an area of development, which can also sometimes speak directly to what these questions are going to ask of them. So actually, yeah, preparing a package to hand off to your recommenders once you make the ask and they say yes can be a really useful tool for applicants.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And over to you, Brennan.
Yeah, I think Amy really summarized it really nicely. I would say the one thing that I always try to also provide the recommenders in addition to the prompts ahead of time is the word limits, and it may vary by school. I've seen a lot of folks be very eager to write letters, and so they write pages about how amazing this candidate is, but there's a 250 or 300 word limit, and it asks a little bit different of a question than what the recommender wanted to write about. So I would say that it's important that they answer the prompts, so preparing them ahead of time and really understanding if you're applying to multiple schools that have separate applications, understanding which of those prompts overlap, so that way you can assign the same recommenders to them to lighten their load, I think is really important. So as you're kind of planning out your strategy, if you have a lot of different schools that you're trying to balance, understanding what are the synergies and how can you make your letter of recommendation writers' lives as easy as possible.
All awesome tips. Thank you, panelists. Leland also has a recommender prep template. So Erica is going to drop in the chat a link if you would like Leland to send that to you via email. Go ahead and fill out that form and you will receive the recommender prep template shortly. And now going into MBA essays. So this is the part of the application where you truly can show the admissions committee who you are as an individual and what you're going to accomplish, not only in your career, but in your life. There's 3 different essay types. One is the personal statement. Some examples of that are Harvard's essay prompt: as we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for the Harvard Business School MBA program? And Stanford's version of this is what matters most to you and why. There's also the why in MBA and why this school prompts. So an example of, or some examples of that are, how is a Columbia MBA going to help you? Or why Stanford? Describe your aspirations and how your Stanford GSB experience will help you realize them. There's also other prompts. So some examples of these are: describe your biggest commitment, tell us your favorite book, movie, or song and why it resonates with you, etc. And so those vary from school to school. But really what schools are looking for with the essays is, who are you and why should we care? So that's something to keep in mind. So the personal statement and the why in MBA, or why this school, are the 2 most common forms of essays from school to school. So we're going to dive into those with our panelists. So we're going to start with Brennan and Amy on the personal statement, and we'll go in that order. What makes a good essay and what tips do you have for that specific type of essay?
Sure.
So
Yeah,
for the personal statement.
Personal statement. Yep. I think this one's a really interesting one because it's so broad. And I think that's the hardest part about it, because you have so many different directions to go. So there's a couple of things that I always recommend folks do. The first and foremost, it should build on the rest of your application and complement it. You don't just try to dump what's already on your resume, what you've already included in your award section. A lot of times people use it to try to put the resume into words. And I would recommend against that, because you want it to be an incremental add to the rest of your story. So the way that I really like to think about it is what matters most to you. And some of the prompts are exactly that. But in a more general sense, you can think about what are your future goals and initiatives that you'd like to accomplish, what's important to you, and how can you be really able to be authentic in your response and share your story. Some people take the mushy gushy route. Some people are more direct. Some people tell stories, which I think can be really effective. And what I always like to do too is, applicants typically have a lot of different directions that they want to go. So I encourage them to kind of bullet out the different types of responses they're thinking about. And then we talk through them to understand which one is most uniquely them, and not in a way that they have to stand out among the crowd, because you don't want it to be not authentic, but enough where someone who knows you really well can read it about you and say, yes, that's undoubtedly that person writing their personal statement about why this is important. And I think that typically guides the most direct and most comprehensive approach to the personal statement. But would love to get perspective. I think Amy was next on this.
Cool. Thanks. Over to you, Amy.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Brennan just said. And I actually think, I think these essays also are probably the HBS one, for example, I think is the hardest essay out there, because it is so open-ended and there's just so many possibilities for how you can respond. I think the 2 most common ways to address an essay like a personal statement are to tell a story, or to maybe structure it more so around like a professional goal. And but I think both can be very successful. And I also think there is a hybrid version as well. whichever way you go, it is important to take advantage of the opportunity to reveal your personality. So that's definitely something really important, especially if you are talking about more professional topics. You still want to make sure you're inserting some color about yourself and who you are and your background. And you, just like Brennan said, what matters most to you, talking about your future goals, all of this should be part of the discussion as you're brainstorming what to write about. And absolutely, it needs to be authentic. It needs to sound like you. And a great way to start on these kinds of essays, I always encourage my clients to start with an outline, jot some notes down on paper, move things around, rearrange. Don't get too, married to the content from the get-go because it changes a lot. And have fun with it. I think these essays also are an opportunity to be yourself and, insert some joy into your application. So that's important to keep in mind too.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And now we'll hand it over to Laura and Jay. What tips or specific pieces of advice do you have for approaching the why an MBA or why the school essay? So we'll start with Laura and then over to you, Jay.
Sure. This is really like a meat and potatoes essay of the application. Lots of schools ask it because they really want to understand how your goals and your whole self really fit into the program. There's a few different ways to approach this, of course, in terms of your storytelling, but what I recommend for everyone is to do their homework. Right? Like talk to current students, talk to alums, get a real nuanced understanding of what this program is all about, not just from an academic standpoint, but culturally and otherwise, right? That's just really going to set you up for success in writing this essay. Along those lines too, don't just think about the academic experience, also consider the environment, the different programming, the extracurriculars, the school's culture, its strengths as well, and really tailor your essay to that program. In the end of the day, the goal really is to write an essay so specific to your goals and to that school that it could not be written for any other program.
Cool. Thank you, Laura. And over to you, Jay.
Yeah, I just absolutely want to echo what Laura said. I think this is definitely an essay to do your homework on, and literal homework at this point. That comes in the form of researching the website, of attending admissions events where you can learn more about the school, and then talking to, in my opinion, one of the most important parts, talking to either current students or alumni of the program. I think that's where you really get to understand the student's perspective. What are these programs or what are these events or professors actually like? And get a better understanding of the school overall. I also think it requires you to do a bit of self-reflection. Just think about what you actually want to do an MBA for. Why are you going to the school at this point? And the way I thought about this essay was, I have this journey, for the deferred perspective at least, I have this journey and this path I want to try and I'm very passionate about. And then I have these long-term goals. And I see the MBA as the main, if not the only way for me to meet those long-term goals. And I think really highlighting how the MBA is this transformative experience, and your school in particular is the only way, or maybe the best way for me to meet my goals, is I think a good way to structure it, because you show them that, one, you research and you fully understand the school. You're not just Control F and replacing schools in with each other. And then you're also showing that you've thought through what you would do on campus, what your impact might be, and then also how that would affect your long-term career. I think that specificity is really important, as well as just being genuine too. I think if you're throwing in terms or programs for the sake of name dropping, if it doesn't make sense with who you are or your narrative, then it's going to be fairly obvious. So don't look up the website half an hour before and then type in 2 centers and a professor. I think it's important to think through what does this do, and then the good writing comes through specificity, so that'll definitely help out.
Awesome, thank you. Those are all amazing tips, and similar to the other parts of the application that we've discussed, Leland also has a helpful article that walks you through how to write powerful essays. So Erica just dropped that in the chat and we recommend checking it out. So how to get started. I'll be brief on here because we want to go into Q&A for a little bit, but study and prepare for the GMAT or GRE and knock that out. Get involved in your community and on campus, build and maintain relationships with potential recommenders, do a ton of self-reflection, as Jay alluded to, and assemble your team of application supporters. So that's friends, family, trusted coworkers, mentors, and of course, MBA admissions coaches. They're the experts and can really help you polish your application and put your best foot forward. So we're going to break out into 2 breakout rooms given our numbers. So there will be 2 panelists per breakout room. So Erica, can you go ahead and break us out, and feel free to turn your cameras on and ask any question in regards to the MBA application that you'd like. Hope you're able to get your questions answered in the breakouts, and thank you panelists for running those breakout rooms. We're going to close with a big round of applause and a thank you to our panelists that joined, Amy, Laura, Brennan, and Jay. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the audience, as well as those who will be watching this recording at a later time. I know that they are very appreciative, and the tips and advice that you shared will hopefully help them as they navigate their MBA applications. Erica is going to drop their profiles in the chat. It's their Leland coach profiles, which shows like a background and will show like their education and their coaching experiences. You can also read coach reviews if that's of interest to you. And you can reach out to any of these coaches on Leland if you're interested in working with some of them through your MBA application process. So thank you very much, panelists, and thanks, Erica, for dropping those profiles in the chat. And a final plug, as Erica mentioned, Leland provides content, community, and coaching to help you with all your MBA applications needs. And Leland recently launched a free private MBA Slack community. So that's something that you should look into joining. That's where you can get your questions answered. You can share experiences, connect with coaches, and pretty much just go through the MBA application process with other high potential applicants. It is a long, drawn out process. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And so going about the process with others is a really good way of approaching it. Just want to close by saying we've shared a lot of valuable tips and advice throughout this session. We hope that you found it helpful, and we wish you the best on your MBA application journey. And know that Leland is here to support you every step of the way. Thank you.